Welcome. Thank you so much for stopping by our channel. I hope that the Lord blesses you through the message. My name is Derek, and I get to serve as the pastor of student ministries here at Hopewell Church. Our student ministries is called Fusion. We meet once a week on Wednesdays from 6:30 to 8:30. If you'd like more information, please feel free to check out hopewellchurch.org. I hope you enjoy the message. It doesn't look too safe. Are you a little afraid? Yeah? Bryn just totally jumped. So, does it smell like gas? So, what's that? Don't worry, I know the cleaning lady. She won't mind. I'm totally picking on her right now. She's not even paying attention, so. Thank you. I appreciate that. They don't need to hear me correctly, though. I just said that I know the cleaning lady, and she won't mind. So chainsaws. Chainsaws are they're radical. They're a really great tool. How many of you have ever used a chainsaw? It does smell like gas. Yeah. So, no, there's other people that were behind you. Yeah. Yep, there's other people. Um, I'm getting there. Calm down. It's if you have never taken down a tree, at first it's a little terrifying, because they don't call them widowmakers for nothing. There have been plenty of people who have taken them down, and it doesn't come down right. So as you're sawing it, you got to be continually watching the tree to make sure that it's not going in a direction you don't want it to go, like on you, depending on how big it is. But when you take down a tree, and you hear that cracking, and it like slowly starts to tilt, and then it goes faster and faster, and bam, hits the ground. It's so satisfying. So satisfying, right? So chains, you have to pick the tree up. So chainsaws are really great tools. They're really useful. I mean, I can get through a tree a lot quicker with that than I can with a handsaw, right? They have bow saws, and they also have a crosscut saw, a two-man crosscut saw, which you're seeing up there. And those take longer. I think the two-man crosscut saw, actually, guys can get pretty fast at that, and you can do it quick. There's actually competitions with that. So, but the thing about a chainsaw is it has to have fuel. If you don't have fuel, it's not very useful, right? But even But here's the other thing about chainsaws. Now this one's pretty sharp. If you have gas in it, because I've had gas in this, and yet it hasn't been very useful whatsoever, because the chain was dull. And when the chain is dull, it becomes almost as hard work as a handsaw, maybe even a little bit harder, because you're trying to use your muscles as opposed to the chain actually cutting it, right? So recently I just had the chain sharpened, and I made the wonderful mistake of going into a rock, and that's not good on a chainsaw. And I think that I maybe made like a dozen cuts with the thing after it was sharp, and it was flying through it like butter. It was awesome. And then I hit a rock, and then it was like I went to the next piece of wood, and I was just like, oh, it's dull. I'm done. So I had to go get it sharpened again, right? So you can have fuel for the chainsaw. I don't know how to sharpen them yet. I would love to learn how to sharpen them, but I don't know how to sharpen them. Sweet. But you can have fuel for a chainsaw, and yet if you also don't have a sharp chain, it's still not very useful. Refueling and resharpening are both a necessity for the saw to work correctly. And here's my first point tonight. We're in our series, finishing up our series, Small Fish, Big Ocean, Life After High School. And in the first 3 weeks, we focused more on the expectations, what you can maybe expect from your professors at college, maybe criticism in Christianity, and we talked a little bit about doubt, how to handle doubt as well, which can be something that's useful even now, learning about those things. But here's my first point tonight. Just like refueling and resharpening are both a necessity for the soul to work correctly, being in a Christian community is a necessity. Being in a Christian community is a necessity. And you're like, Derek, you're preaching to the choir right now. We're here, right? We come on Sundays. But sometimes, whenever there's a transition in life, a change in life, or a busy season in life, it's easy to forget that Christian community is a necessity. It's something that we absolutely need in our lives. Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 5, and in this letter, Paul's addressing a sin issue in the Corinthian church. Right? So not only is the man that he's addressing, talking about, committing adultery with his father's wife, say ew. There you go. That's pretty gross. Committing adultery with his father's wife, right? But apparently, the people of the church are boasting about it, according to Paul, which is really kind of weird. Why would they? That's right, that is messed up. So here's what Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 5:8. Therefore, let us observe the feast. 1 Corinthians 5:8. Therefore, let us observe the feast, not with old leaven or with the leaven of malice and evil, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. Now, when we talked about the Lord's Supper, if you remember, we talked about the Feast of Unleavened Bread a little bit, and here Paul is referring to that once again, where they leave all the leaven out of the bread because the leaven is an illustration of sin and corruption, and it's also the bread doesn't take as long because it doesn't need to rise, and so it's a reminder of whenever the Israelites were taken out of Egypt, and they left with quickness and with haste. And then also it is that separation of sin and impurity that the Egyptians had in their culture, right? And so again, Paul is referring back to this, and he's saying, let's observe this feast. Let's think back to that feast and that separation of sin, right? And so in this and in the previous verses, what Paul's doing here is he's modeling the purpose of Christian community. The Christian community, the purpose is not just entertainment, but it is to encourage, it's to remind each other of truth, and it's to hold each other accountable. And without these in our lives, we're not going to operate correctly. We just won't. Austin Gentry, the author of the book 10 Things Every Christian Should Know for College, makes the point that we are weaker than we think. And I love that. He just says it straight out. You are weaker than you think. And as I say you, I'm pointing back at myself too. And it's not an insult. I want you to think about this for a second. If we're honest, this is more of a rhetorical question. If we're honest, is there any one of us who would live a disciplined life if there were no consequences for our actions? I mean, I've been saved since I was 7 years old. I've been, quote unquote, a pastor for 17 years. And honestly, my flesh, if there were no consequences for my actions, I wouldn't live a disciplined life. And I don't think any of us would. And we're warring with that constantly. And sometimes that desire of our flesh, that desire to want to just be able to do what we want to do instead of living a disciplined life gets so strong. Paul writes about it and says, I do what I don't want to do and don't do what I want to do. The flesh is willing, but the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. He writes this, the need for community isn't a matter of the maturity of the Christian, it's a matter of the necessity for the Christian. And he uses this illustration. He talks about how a sapling needs water to grow and to survive. If you could put up the next picture then of the tree. It says a sapling needs water to grow and to survive, but when it becomes an adult, it doesn't magically stop needing water. It still needs to be fed. It still needs water. And so, guys, being in a Christian community is a necessity. Again, this, it could be taken as I'm preaching to the choir right now because, again, you guys are here. But again, it's those big transitions that sometimes can get us out of the habits that we've been in. It's the I'm out from underneath of my parents' roof, and now I don't need to go to church. I don't have to go to church. I can decide for myself whether I go and be a part, and I shouldn't just say church because I don't want to limit it to that. I don't need to be a part of a Christian community. And there are some people who think that to be saved, you don't have to be in a Christian community. And that's true. That's not what saves you, being in a Christian community. However, again, it is a necessity in order for us to thrive in our relationship, to be encouraged, to be held accountable, to hear the truth. Not just our truth, to hear the truth. Because we're really good at making truth what we want to be truth, to fit our life. We often read, I'm going to read from Ecclesiastes, and this is often read at weddings. But I kind of want to back up for a second because Solomon, in the previous verses, these aren't disconnected, right? He's talking about relationships. It's not just about a wedding. It's not about companionship just as far as spouse, husband and wife. Right? So in verses 1 through 3, he talks about those who are oppressed but have no one to go through the oppression with, no one to comfort them when they're going through that difficult season. In verses 4 through 8, he gives us a picture of someone working hard to gain wealth because they're jealous of what other people have and the loneliness that comes with that. And that person actually gets to the point where they ask why they're depriving themselves of good things, referring to companionship. The good things is the companionship that he's talking about. And so we read this in Ecclesiastes 4, 9 through 12. 2 are better than 1 because they have a good reward for their efforts. For if either falls, this companion can lift him up. But pity the one who falls without another to lift him up. Also, if two lie down together, they can keep warm. But how can one person alone keep warm? And if someone overpowers one person, 2 can resist him. A cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. And so what he's doing is he's writing about what companionship, what others can help provide for us, the necessity of it. Because in these seasons, they can help us when we fall, they can provide warmth, and they can support us when we're attacked. Maybe it's an attack in our mindset where we're just struggling with insecurities. Maybe it's a verbal attack of someone else, and we have a companion there to help us through that. So, as many of you know, I have in-laws that live in Florida, and so we go down like once a year, and we love going down, just hanging out with them. It's just a nice change of scenery, and there's a restaurant called the Blue Gator that we really, really like. And so we went last year. I don't know if any of you guys have a restaurant that like you really, really enjoy, and when you go there, like you usually get the same thing because you know you just really like it. They do it really well. For me, it's Stampede. They have some of the best ribs they have the best ribs that I've ever had. Little shout out Stampede, right? But when we go to Blue Gator, I'm excited because I like their food and I'm like ready for a good meal. Well, before I went, I stopped doing gluten. This is actually Blue Gator right here. It's a pretty great view because you get to sit out. They don't seat inside anymore. There's very limited seating inside anyway, but you sit out on the deck, and it's just beautiful. It's awesome sitting out. And so usually I get what I know I'm going to like. And so we went last year. We only get there because it's in Florida. It's not like we can just be like, hey, let's go grab dinner and we can go to the Blue Gator, right? It's like a long drive. So we go, and just a little bit. We get to go like once or twice, maybe 2 times a year at most, but usually it's about once. And so I decided to be adventurous. I have always heard that frog legs were like really, really good. So they have frog legs on their menu. Do you think you would like to try frog legs? I can tell from your face. You're like, oh my gosh, that's so gross, right? So I decide to be adventurous and try something new. And they come out and I eat them, and I'm just like, this is so disappointing. I'm so sad right now. Like, they were so flavorless. They were so boring. I was like, why do people think these are good? There's no taste whatsoever. Have you guys ever done that where you're super excited to go to a restaurant and you try something new and you're like, why did I try something new? I'm so upset. No, I don't. Yeah. Sometimes we do that because of the risk. Again, there's a comfortability factor when we go with something that we know. Like, we can go to a restaurant that we know that is good, and we can order what we've had before, and we know it's good, and we won't order something different. And the same can be true when it comes to the communities we choose to be involved with. Guys, it is absolutely a necessity that we are in Christian community. However, the problem is sometimes because it becomes so comfortable, we get stuck in Christian community, and that's it. And so here's the second point. You can have friends who are not Jesus followers without acting like those friends. You can have friends who are not Jesus followers without acting like those friends. 1 Corinthians 5, 9 through 11, Paul writes this: I wrote to you in a letter not to sexually immoral people. Now, he's going to clarify what he means by this. I did not mean the immoral people of this world, or the greedy and swindlers or idolaters. Otherwise, you would have to leave the world. But actually, I wrote to you not to associate with anyone who claims to be a brother or sister and is sexually immoral or greedy, an idolater or verbally abusive, a drunkard or a swindler. Do not even eat with such a person. That's interesting. The warning is to not associate, to not be with those who claim to be a follower of Jesus and yet aren't living it. But he's very clearly saying you would have to leave the world to not be around those who are greedy or swindlers. You could also say it like this: we shouldn't have friends who claim to follow Jesus but act like those who don't follow Jesus. That's what Paul's saying. Guys, it's important that we understand that we can't just get stuck in a Christian community where we're comfortable. I know it's easy. I know it's easy, especially depending on some of you, where you go to college down the road. For some of you, further down the road than others, but where you go to college, you get out of your comfort zone, you get out of the bubble that you grew up in, and you make 1, 2, 3 friends, right? And it's a good Christian group of friends holding each other accountable, and that's great, and you get comfortable, and then that's where it ends. And now you're just a group who hold the truth and aren't sharing it with anyone else. But it's absolutely important that we step out of our comfort zones for the sake of others. Paul writes this in 2 Corinthians 5:20. Therefore, we are ambassadors for Christ. Since God is making his appeal through us, we plead on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God. Guys, when we're going out of our comfort zones and we are being friends with those who don't know Jesus, my hope is that our heart is this: we plead on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God. But within this, there's a false dilemma that I love. I love how Gentry, the writer of this book, points it out, this false dilemma that we struggle with being in Christian community, but being with those who are not Jesus followers as well. He says this: it's tempting to think your convictions must be influenced by each group in order to have true community with each group. But that's a false dilemma, because it's built on a false assumption namely, that you can only have community with people so long as your lifestyle is in alignment with theirs, or that we will only accept you as long as you are exactly like them. And this is the game that Satan plays in our heads. The tool that Satan uses is that when we are with people who are not Jesus followers, that we get it somehow inside of our heads that they think we have to be just like them in order for them to be friends with us. And that's not always true. Are there people like that? Absolutely, there are people like that. But there are also plenty of people who are not Jesus followers, who do not expect you in your lifestyle to be exactly like them in order for you to continue to be friends. And so he plays this game that you have to be like them to be in community with them. And so we either do that, and so we play both sides, or so that we don't play both sides and we're good Christians, we step completely out of that community. And yeah, we may be growing spiritually, we may still have a relationship with Jesus, but those people have no light in their lives now. And so Satan has successfully taken the opportunity for truth to be shared, for light to be shined in their life. We have to understand that there's different degrees of relationship. There's people you have an acquaintance with, people who are acquaintances, right? I know who you are. Maybe we talk every once in a while. There's friends. We share common interests and we enjoy spending time together, but there's a deeper level of friendship too, where I'm friends with you. Not only do I like spending time with you and sharing common interests with you, but I also allow you to influence me because you've gained that place in my life. But not everyone has that opportunity in my life. Not everyone that I know, even everyone that I would call a friend, has the opportunity to be an influence in my life. And so there's different levels of friendship. We don't have to live the lifestyle of those who don't follow Jesus just to be friends with them. I want to close with two questions. Are you allowing the correct people to influence you? Just for you to think about. Are you allowing the correct people to influence you? Or do you come here and you act one way and you go to school and you act another way because you're afraid that if you don't, those people won't live in community with you? And is this dilemma, this false dilemma, that you have to ride the fence taking place in your life because you think you have to or because you are attempting to ride the fence? In other words, getting the benefits of both sides, right? I want to go to heaven, but I also want to live the way that I want to live. I'm not going to read it. In case you're unsure of how Jesus responds to a person who lives like that, I would encourage you to read Revelation 3:14 through 16. I'm going to play a closing video just to give you an idea of how Jesus responds to people riding the fence. How he says that he's
alone. I saw the sign, and it opened up my eyes. I saw the scroll. Alone.
There's a little hint for you. You didn't see that coming. Read Revelation 3:14 through 16 if you're unsure. Jesus, we give you glory. We just ask that you would be with us in our small groups. In Jesus' name, amen.